This really brings us to the core question of these stories.
Overwhelming chaos of Chiron's vision. Instead, he focuses on one tiny, illogical detail, a childhood song that Luna couldn't.
An anchor is basically the core concept that gives a world its structure. But, and this is the crucial twist, the people living inside these worlds completely misunderstand. They saved the world and they saved each other. They're alive and they're together. But there's a catch. By becoming the anchor, by having their very connection woven into the fabric.
All right, let's dive into a story that really pulls you deep. And I'm not just talking about deep water. I mean deep into consciousness itself. It's the strange, profound narrative about what might be watching us from the dark and what it could possibly want. So let's get into it.
To really get to the heart of this mystery, we have to start exactly where the source material does, with a question. And it's a question in a language you might not recognize right away, which honestly is the perfect way to set the stage for the kind of deep, cosmic unknown we're about to explore.
And there it is, the translation. This one question. This is the engine that drives the entire story. It's what our main character, and by extension us, is trying to figure out as we go down into an abyss that is very, very aware.
So, we begin with a woman named Akira. And she's not just going for a swim. She's stepping into a body of water that feels, well, different. It's a kind of cold that seems to have a memory, a chilling way of recognizing that she's there. As she goes deeper, this isn't really a physical journey so much as a sensory one. The outside world completely vanishes. Sound just disappears, and it's replaced by this huge, alien pulse that is definitely not her own heartbeat. She has a guide, a man named Mio, leading her deeper into a place where the concept of light itself is just meaningless.
Right as they get close to the heart of this abyss, her guide Mio whispers a warning. It's a simple, terrifying instruction that tells you they're approaching something that maybe human eyes just aren't supposed to see. But you know what? It's already too late.
Akira sees it, and it's not some monster with teeth and claws, nothing like that. It's something way more unsettling. She sees eyes, hundreds of them, just scattered like black stars in the void. And these eyes, they don't reflect light, they absorb it. They just pull everything in. Now, the story is very clear on this point. This thing isn't a who or a what in any way we'd understand. It's not a creature, it is a purpose, an eternal, unchanging function of the universe. It is simply the observer. So, the theory laid out in the story kind of expands on this. Just try to imagine an intelligence that's older than life itself. It's totally static, doesn't move at all, but it sees everything. It doesn't hunt because it doesn't need to eat, it just chooses. You know that weird feeling Akira had? That whisper in the water? Yeah, that's the sign. It's the sign that you've been noticed. You've been chosen.
Okay, so now that we have some idea of what this thing is, we get to the next, even more terrifying question. What does a function like this want? Why is it watching in the first place? And Mia reveals this absolutely horrifying truth with this one chilling line. Humanity, we're not its children. We're not its creation. We are its experiment. Its attempt to figure something out.
And here it is. This is the focus of this whole cosmic experiment. The observer has noticed that this frail, short-lived species called humanity does the impossible. We defy all logic, all for a concept it just can't wrap its mind around. Love. So you have this ancient intelligence trying to solve the puzzle of a uniquely human force. And the criteria for who it chooses to study, it's just heartbreakingly specific. It's not random. It selects people who feel more deeply than others. People who are willing to sacrifice themselves for someone else. People who, as the story puts it, love too profoundly. It's studying the most extreme examples to try and understand the data.
So, we've arrived at the critical moment. This isn't just passive observation anymore. A tiny fragment of the observer's attention makes direct contact with Akira's mind.
And the experience is just overwhelming. Her mind is flooded with visions, with thoughts that are not her own. She sees the entire history of the planet from this non-human perspective. Drowned cities, forgotten creatures, all the souls that have been lost to the deep. But right in the middle of this cosmic data dump, she sees the one person that matters to her, Mio.
Mio, acting as a translator for this silent, ancient being, whispers the words that signal the test is beginning. The experiment is now officially active.
And there it is, the central question from this cosmic researcher. It's seen humans sacrifice their very identity for other people, and it just doesn't compute. It's a direct challenge to our whole concept of self in the face of love. I mean, how would you even begin to answer a question like that?
Akira is completely overwhelmed. Her heart is pounding, but the answer she gives doesn't come from her rational mind. Nope. It comes from the very core of what the observer is trying to study. It comes straight from her heart.
This is the climax. Her answer is this perfect paradox that an entity of pure logic could never, ever have predicted. She defines her own identity, her sense of me, not as some singular separate thing, but as something that is completely inextricably linked to another person. Without that connection, the self just ceases to exist.
The impact of her answer is immediate and it is absolute. For the first time in, well, eons of existence, the observer just stops. That massive alien pulse that filled the entire abyss, it's just gone. Her answer was data so unexpected, so completely outside of its parameters, that it caused the entire function to pause.
You can just feel the mix of awe and terror in Mio's voice. It really underscores how huge this moment is. Akira didn't just answer a question. She introduced a variable that has fundamentally altered a cosmic constant. An emotional, totally illogical human response broke the system.
And that brings us all the way back to that initial question. So, who's watching from the darkness? Well, the source gives us its final answer. It's not a monster we can fight, and it's not a god we can worship. It's something else entirely, a cosmic student, an eternal questioner.
And this is where the story leaves us, with one last, truly mind-bending thought that just reframes everything we just heard. What if love isn't just a feeling, a chemical reaction in our brains? What if it's a fundamental force of the universe, just like gravity or electromagnetism, and we are just the instruments through which this ancient intelligence is trying and failing to finally measure it? That is a profound question to chew on.
Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the massive, mind-bending, and honestly just deeply emotional conclusion of The Last Shore. We're going to be unpacking the grand philosophical conflict of cosmic loneliness and digging into the true nature of human connection. It is an incredibly heavy, beautiful finale, and man, we have a lot of fascinating ground to cover, so let's jump right in. We already hear it. Just imagine people across the entire globe repeating this exact same phrase with this complete emotionless calm. It's chilling, right? This mantra really sets the tone for the final season. It's not just some creepy little anomaly. It's the ultimate red alert. It's signaling the arrival of something ancient, something rising from the very depths of the world.
Part 1. The awakening of the ancient entity.
To really grasp the sheer scale of this finale, you have to look at how reality itself literally starts breaking down. It happens in these terrifying phases. First, the laws of physics just straight up fail, and time actually pauses for seconds at a time. Then, the boundaries of human consciousness start to blur. You have people waking up with foreign names in their heads, sharing the exact same memories as total strangers. And then, and this is a huge one, the ocean itself, this massive, unstoppable force of nature, physically retreats, like it's pulling back in absolute fear. Finally, these massive black rifts tear open the sky, revealing this terrifying starless void where time and distance don't even exist anymore.
And right in the middle of this physical collapse, we get the empties. These are humans who have lost absolutely every trace of emotion, fear, and desire. Their eyes just turn completely pitch black. But you know what makes these empties so horrifying? It's actually not that they're aggressive or violent, because they aren't. It's their complete passive surrender to what is coming. They're literally just waiting for it.
Now here is where the story totally flips the script on us. Yudo starts hearing the thoughts of millions, but eventually he tunes into the thoughts of the entity itself, and he realizes something absolutely profound. The entity isn't evil. It predates life entirely. It comes from an era where literally only consciousness existed in the universe. It's not driven by malice or hatred at all. It's driven by an impossible, infinite loneliness. It has spent billions of years just searching for a way to stop being alone. But the tragedy is, every mind it ever touched just dissolved into it, accidentally wiping out whole civilizations in the process. Which brings us perfectly to the core mystery of the entire series. Part 2, the true nature of the ocean. This is a literal philosophical war at the heart of the story. We're looking at two completely different definitions of what it means to be united. On one side, you've got the entity, right?
It seeks connection through total absorption, just merging all life into one giant consciousness, which totally destroys the individual self. But on the other side, we have the ocean. And as Ren explains, the ocean isn't a prison. It learned to connect people through empathy while fully preserving their personal boundaries and their individuality. It's the ultimate representation of closeness without losing who you are.
The problem is, the entity doesn't understand that kind of connection. It views loneliness as the absolute worst pain in the universe and just wants to end it by forcefully merging everyone together. And here's the truly horrifying twist. The entity isn't just coming from beneath the earth, it's waking up inside humanity. Every human feeling of isolation, every fear, every drop of hatred literally becomes a door for the entity to enter our world. The cosmic threat becomes deeply, inescapably personal.
Part 3. Closeness without absorption. As reality breaks apart, with streets dissolving into nothing, buildings looking like faint memories, and those towering water figures silently watching from the shores, humanity's true strength actually starts to emerge. Amidst all the chaos, strangers are spontaneously saving strangers. People are sharing their very last bits of food. Individuals are choosing to just sit with the dying, so they don't have to face the end alone. These spontaneous acts of empathy prove to the ocean that a different, better kind of love actually exists. And for the first time in millions of years, the ocean begins to hope.
You obviously can't just punch a cosmic entity of infinite consciousness, right? Brute force is completely useless here. But they realize a specific 3-step sequence can stop it, just by showing it a concept it has literally never comprehended. Step 1, humanity has to stay emotionally connected. Step 2, they have to retain their individual selves while doing it. And step 3, they need a conductor to link the people directly to the ocean to manifest this connection.
And that leads us right into the climax of the story. Part 4, the final storm and sacrifice. As the greatest storm in Earth's history kicks off, with waves reaching the clouds and the sky completely shattering, this crazy plan is put into motion.
Ren understands that a conductor is needed, and then it hits him. He is already that conductor. His consciousness is partially non-human, making him the absolute perfect bridge to connect the ocean and humanity. He accepts his fate with this incredibly calm smile, acknowledging that, you know what, it was his human side that taught the ocean how to love the world in the first place. During this massive apocalyptic storm, the ocean actually speaks to humanity, but not with words. It speaks through feeling. For a few miraculous minutes, every single person on Earth feels the emotions of everyone else. It's wild. They feel the collective fear, the excruciating pain, the deep hope, the loss, and the love. Yet beautifully, despite this incredibly profound shared connection, each person remains entirely themselves. They are completely connected, but they aren't unified into some single formless blob. And this is just brilliant. It perfectly resolves the main thematic conflict of the whole show. The entity, peering through those huge rifts in the sky, encounters something it has literally never seen in billions of years. It sees intimacy without annihilation. It witnesses beings sharing their absolute deepest souls without dissolving into each other. Baffled by this completely alien concept, the ancient being simply stops.
But man, this victory comes at a severe personal cost. Anchoring this massive cosmic win is Aoi. We hear her deeply human, tearful scream of grief on the beach. She grabs Ren, absolutely terrified, and shouts, "Are you going to disappear for everyone again?" It completely grounds this massive, universe-saving spectacle in raw, totally relatable human heartbreak.
Aoi whispers that she just doesn't want to lose him again, and Ren's response is his final, heartbreaking instruction to her before he makes the ultimate sacrifice. He just tells her, then don't let go of the world. It is such a beautiful, tragic plea to just keep fighting for connection, even through the crushing pain of loss.
While she holds his hand, Ren fully merges with the ocean. His body just slowly dissolves into ocean drops right before our eyes. With his sacrifice, the connection is sealed. He permanently closes the rift between the worlds. The apocalyptic storm vanishes, and humanity is officially saved from being absorbed into the void.
Part 5. The Forever Changed World. Years pass, the physical world heals, and the oceans return to normal. But the internal world of humanity is permanently transformed. We see this new era where empathy is lingering. It's practically tangible. Humans occasionally still feel each other's emotions, especially when they're near the sea. It's this direct, lasting result of the ocean's intervention and Ren's sacrifice. We see Yudo grow up to become a scientist, dedicating his whole life to studying this new bond between human consciousness and the ocean.
And Io, she lives peacefully by the shore, well into her old age.
Which brings us to the beautiful, lingering final thought of the entire series. A little girl comes up and asks Aoi, "Is it true the ocean remembers everyone?" And Aoi, looking out at the horizon where Ren's silhouette momentarily appears in the moonlight, replies, "No, it is learning to love them." As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really sit with that powerful idea. The universe isn't just some cold, lonely void passively recording our existence. What if, through our deliberate, everyday acts of empathy and true connection, we are actually teaching it how to love? Think about that. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely wild, a masterfully crafted piece of metaphysical sci-fi called The Last Shore, a bond between oceans and souls. We're going to unpack a story where the very fabric of reality starts to unravel, and that line between human consciousness and the deep, mysterious ocean completely dissolves. It's one of those narratives that asks some seriously profound questions about existence, connection, and what it actually means to be human when we're staring down the infinite. Just listen to this. And the ocean began to retreat, as if afraid of what was rising from the depths. I mean, wow. Talk about a hook, right? That chilling line thrusts us straight into this reality-breaking mystery. It sets the tone perfectly because this isn't just water pulling back from the beach. It's a cosmic reaction to something ancient waking up, something so huge it terrifies the earth itself. So let's get right into part 1, cracks in reality. The story doesn't just kick off with some massive explosion. No, it starts with these quiet, deeply unsettling fractures. Think about it. First, the literal laws of nature just stutter. Time stops for a few seconds here and there. Then it gets intensely psychological. People in completely different countries start having the exact same memories at the exact same time, waking up with strangers' names echoing in their heads. And then the ocean begins its massive, unnatural retreat. The suspense here is brilliant because it's not an alien invasion. Reality itself is breaking down, and we're left wondering what could possibly have the power to do that. And then come the symptoms that hit humanity directly. Across the globe, we see the emergence of the empties. These are people entirely stripped of fear, desire, any emotion really, and their eyes turn pitch black. But here's the kicker. They aren't some horde of violent zombies. They're perfectly calm. They just stand there and say, "We already hear it." Honestly, that complete lack of aggression is exactly what makes them so profoundly terrifying. They're basically vessels, already claimed by whatever is coming for us. Moving on to part 2, the nature of cosmic loneliness. We actually start figuring out what's causing all this through a character named Yuto. He starts losing himself as he hears the thoughts of millions of people at once, and eventually the thoughts of the entity itself. And you know, the entity isn't your typical cartoon villain. It was born before physical life even existed. Just pure consciousness floating in the void for billions of years, desperately searching for a way to end its isolation. But here is the real tragedy. Any mind or civilization it ever touched instantly dissolved into it. Entire civilizations just vanished, not out of malice, but because they couldn't hold on to their individual selves when they touched this infinite consciousness. So the crucial takeaway here is that the entity's motivation is undeniably tragic. It genuinely believes that loneliness is the absolute worst pain in the universe, and it just wants to cure it. The problem? Its cure is completely apocalyptic. It wants to merge all living things into a single eternal consciousness, slipping in through the cracks of our own fear, hatred, and isolation. Which brings us to part 3, the ocean as humanity's shield. This is where we hit a massive plot twist in the lore. The ocean isn't just a body of salt water, it's been acting as a metaphysical buffer for our planet all along. On one hand, you have the entity, representing unity through total assimilation, completely erasing the individual to cure the loneliness. But on the other hand, you have the ocean. The ocean is all about connection through empathy, while preserving who you are. It was never a prison. It was this grand evolutionary attempt to create a bond where people could be physically separated yet deeply connected without destroying their unique personalities. But the entity doesn't understand that distinction at all, and its awakening suddenly hits overdrive. We're talking literal giant black rifts tearing open the sky, revealing a starless void of infinite consciousness. Down in the cities, physics is just totally failing. Streets shift, buildings look like blurry memories. And meanwhile, these massive, silent figures made entirely of water start rising from the sea, just watching us. The entity isn't hiding anymore. It is waking up directly inside humanity's collective fears. Yet, right in the middle of this cosmic apocalypse, humans do what humans do best. We don't just panic. Spontaneously, strangers start saving strangers. People share their last scraps of food. They choose to sit beside the dying simply so they don't have to face the end alone. It's beautiful, really. These quiet, desperate acts of human empathy resonate outward. The ocean feels this, and for the first time in millions of years, it begins to hope. And that brings us to part 4, the final storm and sacrifice. That surge of hope kicks off the climax, the greatest storm in Earth's history, bridging the physical world and the metaphysical void. The strategic reality of this final battle is fascinating. I mean, you can't exactly punch an infinite entity, right? It can only be stopped if humanity confronts it with a concept it has never understood: closeness without absorption. We have to prove that perfect connection and individuality can coexist. But to broadcast that to a cosmic entity, humanity needs a conduit, a single consciousness to link everyone to the ocean. And the character Ren realizes he is already that conduit. This revelation drops these massive, universe-ending stakes right into his deeply intimate relationship with his partner Aoi. She immediately gets what this means. In a moment of sheer desperation and fear, she screams at him, "Are you going to disappear for everyone again?" But Ren, he doesn't panic. He just gives this incredibly calm smile. He completely accepts his role. He tells Io that a part of him hasn't been entirely human for a long time, but it was precisely his human half, his capacity for connection, that taught this ancient ocean how to truly love the world. So he makes the ultimate sacrifice, completely merging his consciousness with the ocean to act as the ultimate shield. As he does, the final storm hits its absolute peak, and the ocean pulls off something unprecedented. It broadcasts humanity's collective emotional spectrum to every single person on Earth all at once. Suddenly, every human feels it all. For sure, they feel the fear and the pain, but they also feel the profound hope, the love, and the devastating loss of everyone else. So for a few miraculous minutes, humanity is perfectly connected, but nobody is erased. And guys, this is the triumphant turning point. The entity looks through those rifts and it just freezes. It's totally paralyzed by this impossible paradox. It sees billions of minds perfectly united, yet every single individual remains undeniably themselves. It's defeated not by a weapon, but by the incomprehensible power of true empathy. As the cosmic chaos starts to die down, we're left with this deeply personal, quiet goodbye. Down on the shore, always holding Ren's hand, she's terrified of losing him, begging him not to go, and Ren leaves her with this heartbreakingly beautiful final instruction: then don't let go of the world. Right after he says that, we get this incredibly poignant visual. Ren's physical body slowly dissolves into drops of ocean water, right in front of Aoi. As he merges fully, the metaphysical rifts in the sky close up for good, and that colossal final storm just fades into a quiet breeze. Let's look at the aftermath in part 5, Closeness Without Losing Oneself. The epilogue drops us into this profound sense of peace. The world has healed, but humanity is fundamentally different now. Years pass. Yuto dedicates his life to studying this brand new, permanent link between human consciousness and the sea. Because of Ren's sacrifice, humans now subtly, constantly feel a lingering empathy for one another, especially when they're near the water. And Aoi? She lives out her life quietly on that very same shore. There's this one really striking moment near the end where a little girl walks up to Aoi and asks, "Is it true that the ocean remembers all the people?" Aoi just looks out at the horizon, smiles, and says, "No, it is learning to love them." The whole thing wraps up with this hauntingly beautiful final image. A quiet Pacific Ocean at night. Moonlit waves gently rolling in, and just for a fleeting second in the water, the silhouette of Ren appears, still watching the stars, forever standing alongside the humanity he saved. It's an incredibly peaceful, emotionally satisfying end to a massive journey. Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this explainer. The sci-fi elements here are absolutely incredible, but they're really just a vehicle to ask a very human question. As we navigate our own lives, surrounded by a world that can honestly feel pretty isolating at times, we have to ask ourselves, can we maintain our deep connection to each other without losing ourselves? It's a provocative thought to leave you with today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this deep dive sparked your curiosity to explore these concepts in your own life. Catch you next time.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're dissecting an absolute masterclass in psychological horror. We're looking at a piece of microfiction that manages to do in barely 60 words what full-length novels literally struggle to pull off in hundreds of pages. It builds a whole world, drops a terrifying set of rules, totally shatters them, and then boom, leaves you with a full-blown existential crisis, all in the time it takes you to take a sip of coffee. So today, we're going to break down exactly how this author manipulates pacing, setting, and our own psychological vulnerabilities to craft a perfect, bite-sized nightmare.
Just think about that specific phrase, that sound at 3:17. It grabs you immediately, right? There's no once upon a time, no long description of the weather. We're dropped right into the deep end. By leading with that hyper-specific time of 3:17 and coupling it with a mysterious sound, it just hooks you. We aren't talking about some vague, spooky midnight vibe here. We are dealing with an exact, documented phenomenon. It feels real. It feels clinical. And you know, if you've ever been wide awake at 3:17 in the morning, you know exactly what I mean. It's a time when the world is dead quiet and literally every single creak of the floorboard sounds like a gunshot.
So let's look at Section 1, Anatomy of Hospital Horror, setting the scene. Okay, let's dive right into this. Hospitals are such fascinating spaces in psychology, aren't they? By day, they're all about healing, science, total control. But at night, that atmosphere completely flips. The long, sterile hallways, the beeping machines, the isolation, it all gets deeply unsettling. You're in a place where people are incredibly vulnerable, physically compromised, and often straddling the line between life and death. And it's within that exact setting we get our first line. Every night at 3:17 in the hospital, one sound echoes. Notice the word echoes. It kind of gives you this empty, cavernous feeling. But actually, scratch that. The most important part is that extreme specificity again. The author doesn't say around 3 a.m., they say 3:17. Psychologically, precise numbers hardwire into our brains as facts. It tells us this isn't a random hallucination. This is a scheduled, recurring event, a routine. And man, there's something deeply, chillingly wrong about a haunting that runs on a strict schedule. And then we get to the sound itself, like someone sitting on the bed. It's just a single, simple sensory detail, but wow, it does so much heavy lifting. Think about what a bed represents to you. It's your ultimate safe space. It's where you close your eyes and just let your guard down completely. Hearing the rustle of sheets and feeling the mattress physically dip from a sudden weight, that immediately invades your most personal, vulnerable space. It crosses the boundary from just being a distant noise in the hallway right up to the very edge of your own physical body. You can almost feel that mattress tilt, right? Let's move to Section 2, the closed room rule, establishing the tension.
Now that the threat is literally inside the room, practically sitting on top of the protagonist, we get this vital psychological mechanic, the rule. We see this everywhere, from mythology to modern thrillers. Dropping a rule is a surefire way to crank up the tension. Because as humans, we have this fatal flaw where we're just irresistibly drawn to breaking rules just to see what happens. Listen to it. If you hear it, don't open your eyes. That's not a suggestion. That is the absolute law of this terrifying hospital ecosystem. And notice it comes from a nurse. That's a figure of medical authority, someone whose literal job is to keep you alive. If the person in charge of your health tells you that your survival depends on simply keeping your eyes shut, the sheer dread of what might be in that room skyrockets. Because the terror relies entirely on your own imagination.
And there it is, the transgression. Just 4 words. Today, I opened them. This is the massive pivot point of our whole explainer. I mean, we all knew it was coming, right? It's that psychological inevitability of the forbidden fruit. But the very second our narrator breaks the rule, the story shifts gears completely. We move out of a state of passive, agonizing dread, where you're just lying in the dark praying the threat goes away, straight into active, immediate terror. There's absolutely no going back now. The consequences have to be faced.
And this sequence brilliantly illustrates how rapidly these micro-events unfold in the dark. At 3:17 a.m., the auditory trigger happens. Then, a quick flashback to that ominous warning from the nurse to establish the massive stakes. And then, in the literal next heartbeat, the present action, opening the eyes. In just a handful of lines, the author walks us up this incredibly steep staircase of suspense and then just shoves us right over the edge. It's incredibly efficient storytelling.
Moving on to Section 3, the mirror reflection, the shocking reveal.
So we step into the third act of this microscopic play. The narrator's eyes are open now, and the pacing really slows down here to match a panicked heartbeat. We are methodically stepping into the main reveal. On the edge of the bed sat me. Boom. The sheer shock of the doppelganger reveal hits us with full, uncanny valley force. The narrator isn't looking at some random monster, a ghost, or a killer in a mask. They are staring at an impossible reality-bending situation. You know, the absolute deepest horror usually doesn't come from the unknown. It comes from the deeply familiar being fundamentally wrong. Seeing yourself sitting at the edge of your own bed, that completely shatters any foundational grasp you have on reality.
And think about the claustrophobia tying this physical space together. The bed, the IV drip, the edge of the mattress. The narrator isn't just hanging out in a room, they are physically tethered to this bed by an IV. They can't run away, they are completely anchored in place. By detailing just these few, highly confined physical elements, the author traps the narrator, and honestly, us along with them, in an inescapable proximity to the threat.
So what's absolutely fascinating here is the stark contrast between these two versions of the protagonist. On one hand, we have our narrator, lying in bed, actively observing, having just broken the ultimate rule. On the other hand, we have the visitor, sitting on the edge, pale, hooked up to an IV drip. These are physically distinct states of the exact same person. And ironically, the visitor is the one who actually looks sick, the one who looks like they belong in a hospital bed. That visual disconnect really messes with your head and forces your brain to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. Which one is actually supposed to be there?
Then, the doppelganger finally speaks. Close your eyes quickly. Okay, what a masterstroke of terrifying irony. This pale apparition, the exact monster our narrator was so deathly afraid of, is now frantically enforcing the nurse's original rule. The threat isn't attacking at all. The threat is terrified. And I mean, if the monster sitting on the edge of your bed is scared and actively begging you to close your eyes, what on earth is about to happen?
Which brings us to section 4. Who is the real you? The existential dread.
All right, so the crucial point is, we've hit the climax of our explainer. The horror has totally morphed. We went from being afraid of the dark, to afraid of a monster, to afraid of ourselves, and now we are swimming in profound existential dread. The narrative is about to just drop the floor out from under us one last time. Because when the real you wakes up, I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Who is the real you? This single line completely upends the perspective of the entire story. If the thing sitting on the bed is warning you about the real you waking up, well, what does that make the narrator? Are they just a dream, a splintered personality, some temporary placeholder in a sleeping mind? It strips away the literal one thing you thought you could count on, your own identity.
There won't be room for two? Wow, what a chilling, completely unresolved final thought. It leaves us hanging with this terrifying implication that an absolute erasure is about to happen. The story just abruptly ends right before the consequence arrives, which leaves your brain to frantically fill in the horrifying blank of what actually happens when the real you opens their eyes. It really forces you to ask yourself, if you woke up in the dark tonight at exactly 3:17, how sure are you that you are the original you? I'll let you sleep on that thought. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and we'll see you in the next one.
Welcome in, everyone. So in the DarkMind universe, reality isn't something you can count on. It's more like a program. And today, we're going to dig into its architecture. And, what happens when that program starts to seriously crash?
This really brings us to the core question of these stories. What happens when the rules of your world can literally be hacked and broken? What do you do when the entire operating system of your universe just hits a fatal error?
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the glitchy, unstable foundation these worlds are built on. Then, we'll get into the secrets holding them together and the ideological weapons used to tear them apart. And finally, we'll explore that huge, world-defining choice that comes next and the new reality that gets built right from the ashes.
Okay, so it all kicks off with this really terrifying idea. The world you trust, the ground beneath your feet, is fundamentally unstable. Kind of like a program that's about to have a system-wide crash. And listen, this is not just a metaphor. You see it with Karen, right? The mystic who's plagued by these chaotic visions. You see it with the witnesses, this group that sees literal cracks in a world that's just a little too perfect. And of course, with Akira, our hero who finds out she's the one who broke reality. The message is crystal clear. The system itself is dangerously unstable.
So if these realities are so fragile, what's stopping them from just dissolving into total chaos? Well, the answer is something we can call an anchor, a central idea that's holding the whole thing together.
An anchor is basically the core concept that gives a world its structure. But, and this is the crucial twist, the people living inside these worlds completely misunderstand the one thing that defines their entire existence.
And this just shows the massive gap between what they think is true and what's actually happening. The characters, they see a protective wall, a safe place. But the truth? It's a prison. And it wasn't designed to keep threats out, it was designed to keep them in.
It gets even crazier. They're terrified of this observer, this warden, who is ironically the only thing stopping their universe from collapsing. They thought they were fighting some big villain, but they were actually kicking out the main support pillar holding up their whole world.
And this quote just perfectly captures how fragile their reality is. A single recorded sentence from Karen's father shatters an entire worldview. The sanctuary they built their lives around was a prison all along, and they had no idea.
So if a reality is built on a misunderstanding, how do you tear it all down? Not with bombs, no. You use a single powerful idea.
The most powerful weapons in these stories are never physical, they're ideological. And this leads to this fundamental collision of worldviews, a battle between two totally different ways of seeing reality itself. On one side, you've got Chiron, the mystic. He operates on visions and prophecy. He's all about the why. And on the other, you have Nick, the technician. He only trusts data and logic. He just cares about the how. And Nick's way of deconstructing things is just brilliant in its own way. He completely ignores the overwhelming chaos of Chiron's vision. Instead, he focuses on one tiny, illogical detail, a childhood song that Luna couldn't possibly know. From that one detail, he figures out the vision isn't a warning about her fate, it's a message about Chiron's true role. He uses pure logic to turn the vision against the very person who saw it. Now the witnesses method is, well, it's even more insidious. They don't attack Akira and Mio's connection with force. They hollow it out from the inside, with carefully planted doubt. These questions are like a virus, designed to eat away at the absolute faith that holds their bond and their entire world together. So, the worlds are broken, the foundations have crumbled into dust. What's next? This is the most critical turning point in these stories. It all comes down to one single world-defining choice. Just think about Chiron. He's hit with this horrifying new reality. His whole life he thought he was the savior. Now, cold, hard logic proves he's the trigger for the disaster. But in that moment of shattering truth, he doesn't break. He accepts it. And by doing that, his chaotic visions finally snap into perfect focus. Akira's moment is just as powerful. Her reality is literally dissolving. Her connection to Mio is being severed by all this doubt. So what does she do? She stops fighting it. She allows that corrosive doubt in, accepts it, and from that place of total vulnerability, she makes a simple conscious declaration of her bond. This isn't about rebooting the old system. This is an act of pure creation. And this brings us to our final and honestly most crucial point. These individual choices, they don't just patch up the old worlds. No, they forge entirely new realities built on a completely different set of rules. This right here is a complete paradigm shift. The old systems were all built on a single point of failure. One person, one idea, one sacrifice. But the new reality, the one born from conscious choice, is built on something truly revolutionary, a shared existence. And this one line, it says it all. Us together is the new foundation. That's not just a declaration of love, it's a statement of physics in this universe. The bond between two people stops being just an emotion. It becomes the literal structural foundation for their entire world. So when you put it all together, the takeaway is pretty profound. In the logic of the DarkMind universe, love isn't just a feeling. It's a fundamental, system-altering force. It's the one thing powerful enough to access the source code of reality and rewrite the whole program from the ground up. Which leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. If reality can be broken by doubt and then rebuilt by choice, well, then the power to create worlds lies with individuals. The only question left is, who's going to be the next architect?
In the DarkMind universe, reality is, well, it's not what you think. It's more like a program, something that can be hacked, totally broken, and even rewritten from scratch. So today, we're going to dive into 3 key stories from this universe. We'll look at how these worlds are built, how they shatter, and, maybe the most important part, who actually gets to pick up the pieces and rebuild. And that really brings us to the big question that hangs over all these stories, right? What happens when the rules of your world just start to break? I mean, what do you do when the very operating system of your universe hits a fatal error? When you start seeing these little glitches in the matrix, or you're plagued by chaotic visions, or you're stuck in a world that's so perfect it just feels unsettlingly wrong. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to talk about the glitch in the system, these really unstable foundations. Then, we'll look at the anchor of reality, what's holding it all together. After that, the weapon of doubt, and how these worlds get torn apart. Then comes the choice to rebuild, and finally, the new foundation that gets laid. All right, section 1. It all kicks off with this really terrifying idea that the world you know and trust, it's not nearly as solid as you think it is. You see this across the board. You've got Karen's insane, chaotic visions. You've got the witnesses who start seeing cracks in a world that's just too perfect. And then there's Akira, who finds out she's the one who broke reality in the first place. The message here is loud and clear. The foundation is shaky, and it is about to give way. So, if these realities are so incredibly fragile, you gotta wonder, what's stopping them from just dissolving into total chaos? Well, each world has something we can call an anchor, a core idea that gives it all some kind of structure. But, and this is a big but, there's always a twist. And just look at the massive gap between what people think is going on and what's actually happening. The people living in these worlds completely misunderstand the one thing that defines their entire existence. They see a wall and think, oh, that's protecting us. Nope, it's a prison. They feel a connection and think it's just a bond, a feeling. Wrong again, it's the entire operating system. And they're terrified of this warden who is, ironically, the only thing stopping their universe from completely falling apart. And this quote right here, it just shatters an entire worldview. Stina Kitka, "The wall is a cage." Just a few words, recorded by Chiron's father, and boom. The sanctuary they'd revered their whole lives was really just a prison. And the crazy part? They never even had a clue. It's the same deal with the Observer. This wasn't some evil, mustache-twirling jailer. It was just a function, a totally necessary focal point for consciousness. Think about it this way. Without an observer, reality is just this chaotic soup of infinite possibilities. The Observer was the thing that collapsed all of that down to one single, stable existence. So they weren't fighting some big bad villain. They had basically just kicked out a critical support pillar holding the whole roof up. Okay, so if these realities are built on beliefs, on ideas that are fundamentally misunderstood, how do you tear them down? Well, you don't bring in the big guns. You don't use bombs. You use ideas. The most powerful weapons in these stories aren't physical at all. They're all about ideology. And what you get is this total collision of worldviews. On one side, you have Chiron. He's the mystic. He works with visions, prophecy, destiny. He's all about the why. And on the other side, you've got Nick, the technician. He's all about data, recordings, cause and effect. He cares about the how. Nick isn't there to figure out what a prophecy means. He's there to take it apart, piece by piece, with cold, hard logic. And here's his method. And it's brilliant. He completely ignores all the big, scary, chaotic stuff in Chiron's vision. Instead, he zooms in on one tiny, almost forgotten detail, a childhood song. See, Luna couldn't possibly know that song, so Nick deduces the vision can't be a warning about her fate. No, the really critical piece here is that it has to be a message about Chiron's role in her fate. It's amazing. Nick uses pure logic to turn the vision into a weapon against the very person who saw it. Now the witnesses, their method is even more insidious, if you can believe it. They don't try to brute force their way through Akira and Mio's connection. Oh no, they hollow it out from the inside, using carefully planted, corrosive doubt. I mean, look at these questions. They're not just questions, they're poison. What if your feelings aren't even real? What if you're just a program? They're designed specifically to attack the certainty, the absolute faith that holds their bond, and by extension their entire world, together. By making Akira and Mio doubt the one thing they thought was real, their own feelings, the witnesses just dissolve the anchor of their reality. And they do it without firing a single shot. So, okay, the worlds are broken. The foundations have just crumbled to dust. What's next? This right here is maybe the most important part of all these stories. It all comes down to a single, world-altering choice. Think about Chiron. He's staring down this absolutely horrifying new reality. His whole life, he believed he was meant to be the savior. And now, he's just been shown with undeniable logic that he's actually the trigger for the very disaster he's trying to stop. But here's the thing. In that moment of terrible revelation, he doesn't break. He accepts it. He accepts this new awful role, and for the first time ever, all those chaotic visions suddenly snap into focus. He sees a clear, terrifying path forward, and he makes the choice to walk it. Akira's moment, wow, it's just as powerful. Her world is literally dissolving into static. Her connection to Mio is gone, and she just stops fighting. She stops trying to prove the connection is real. She lets the doubt in, she accepts it, and then from that place of total acceptance, she makes a simple, conscious, powerful declaration of her bond. And that, right there, is the crucial distinction. What she does, it wasn't a desperate plea to try and reboot the old system, no. It was a conscious choice. It was the creation of something entirely new, forged out of pure will in the middle of all that chaos. She's not trying to get back what she lost. She is building something brand new, something that stands on its own. So we come to our final section, the new foundation. Because these individual choices, they don't just patch up the old worlds. They forge entirely new realities, built on a completely different set of rules. This is a complete paradigm shift, you guys. The old systems, the observer, the original connection, they all needed a single point to function. A single individual, a single sacrifice. But this new reality, the one born from choice, it's built on something totally revolutionary, a shared existence. The anchor doesn't have to be one person anymore. It can be the bond between people. And this one line just says it all. Us together is the new foundation. It perfectly captures this new architecture. The bond between two people stops being just an emotional state. It becomes the literal, structural foundation for their entire universe. It's not something that just exists inside of reality anymore. It is the reality. So when you put all of these pieces together, the takeaway is pretty profound. In the internal logic of the DarkMind universe, love isn't just an emotion. It's a fundamental, system-altering force. It's a force of nature that isn't bound by the cold, hard rules of cause and effect. It is quite literally the one power strong enough to look at the system, say no, and rewrite the whole thing from the ground up. And that really leaves us with one final, provocative question. If a reality can be completely torn down by a single, well-placed doubt, and then totally rebuilt by a single conscious choice, what does that mean? It means the power to create worlds isn't just for gods or massive systems. It rests in the hands of individuals. Which really makes you wonder, if reality is built on choice, who's going to be the next architect?
All right, let's talk about a story where the fundamental rules of existence just start to unravel. We're going to dive into what happens when the very fabric that holds our world together begins to, break. So, where does our story kick off? It starts with the most basic thing imaginable, a time. Specifically, night. A moment that's already shrouded in darkness and a deep, deep uncertainty.
And from that time, we get a place. A desolate, empty shore. But this isn't that peaceful, relaxing kind of quiet. You know the feeling? It's the silence of something important being gone. And right into that emptiness, something appears. But it's not a sound, it's not a person, it's just this undeniable presence, an anomaly, something that just shouldn't be there.
And this presence, which is basically a glitch in the universe's programming, it speaks directly to our main character, Akira. And its first words? They're not a friendly hello, they're an accusation. It tells her, the only reason you can even perceive me is because you're the one who broke reality to begin with.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. I mean, forget everyday problems. What do you do when the entire operating system of the universe gets a fatal error and just starts to fall apart?
Okay, so to even begin to understand this reality-breaking glitch, you first have to know what caused it. And it turns out, the world isn't breaking because something new showed up, it's breaking because something that was vital, something that held it all together, is now gone.
Now, your first thought, and Akira's too, is probably that this missing entity, this original observer, was some kind of villain, right? A warden they needed to get away from. But was that really the case?
The answer is no. Just a flat-out, kind of chilling no. They weren't fighting against a jailer. They had just knocked out a crucial support pillar for the whole building.
And this is where everything flips.
The observer's true purpose wasn't malevolent at all. He was the stabilizing force. His consciousness was the single point that fixed reality in place, keeping it from just dissolving into pure chaos.
Now, it's really important to get this. The observer wasn't a god or a king. Think of it more like a function, a necessary point of consciousness that gave structure to everything else. You know, it's this fascinating idea that kind of touches on real-world physics and philosophy. This concept that observation itself is what solidifies reality out of infinite possibilities. So without it, you get glitches. You get a universe that can't even hold its own shape.
Okay, so the problem is on the table. The universe needs an anchor. Simple enough. But how in the world do you create a new one? Well, this next part explores the plan and its absolutely staggering price.
So the glitch, it lays out a formula, a recipe, if you will. You need 3 ingredients. The first 2 are already just mind-bendingly huge, a consciousness that can hold the entire universe and a connection to every single living thing. But it's that 3rd ingredient that completely changes the game.
That source that defies logic? It's love. But we're not talking about a simple emotion here. In the logic of this universe, love is a fundamental, system-altering force. It's something that isn't bound by the cold, hard rules of cause and effect, which makes it the only thing powerful enough to actually rewrite them.
But you can't just reboot reality for free. There's always a cost to making a fundamental change like this. And in this case, the price isn't just high, it's absolute. The sacrifice required is everything, your entire self. To become the new anchor, Akira has to give up her consciousness, her individuality, everything that makes her, her. She wouldn't die, not exactly. She'd become the very fabric of the world, no longer a person living in it.
So that's a pretty impossible choice to have to make. But what if the choice itself is built on a flawed premise? This is where the story takes a massive turn, because it turns out there's a flaw in the system's rules.
Right at the very last second, as Akira is about to make this ultimate sacrifice, the glitch steps in and drops an absolute bombshell. The idea that the anchor has to be a single person, that's just a rule from the old, broken system. The rules aren't what they thought they were. The observer doesn't have to be just one person. And just like that, the entire game changes. This is a complete paradigm shift. The old system, it demanded the sacrifice of an individual. But this new possibility, it's revolutionary. It's about a shared existence. See, the anchor doesn't have to be a person. It can be the connection between people. So what does that actually look like in practice? How do you make a connection the anchor for all of reality? In this last part, we get to see how Akira and her companion Mio managed to forge a completely new path forward.
And this is it. This is the new solution. It's not about one person sacrificing themselves for the other anymore. It's about their bond, their love, becoming the actual structural force. Us, together, is the new foundation for the world.
And the consequences are just profound. Love literally becomes the new architecture of this reality. And with this new stable system in place, the glitch, which was really just an error message from the old system, is no longer needed, so it just fades away. Reality is whole again, but its foundation is now something totally, radically new.
So they did it. They saved the world and they saved each other. They're alive and they're together. But there's a catch. By becoming the anchor, by having their very connection woven into the fabric of existence, they become something more than human, and maybe something other than human. And this leaves us with one final haunting thought. An entire reality built not on a single stable point, but on the bond between two people. A bond that is incredibly powerful, yes, but also potentially fragile. It really makes you wonder, what happens to everyone and everything if that bond ever breaks?
Welcome back, everyone. Today, we've got a truly mind-bending explainer mapped out for you. We're going to unpack a highly haunting, speculative story called Whispers of the Deep. It's one of those narratives that literally forces us to look out of the water and ask a pretty profound question. What if the ocean isn't just water? What if it's alive? And what if it's completely aware of us? Okay, let's dive into this, because this story doesn't just spin a fantasy. It actively plays on our very real anxieties about the unknown, weaving a deeply unsettling narrative about an ocean that actually has plans for us. Now, to really grasp the impact of this story, let's kick things off with a fact that sets the entire stage: less than 10%. We all like to think we know our own planet, right? I mean, we've got satellites mapping every tiny city and dirt road, But the truth is, less than 10% of our oceans have actually been explored. To put that into perspective, that's basically like living in a massive mansion and only ever seeing the front porch. The story we're unpacking today uses this fact not just as a passing statistic, but as a giant, flashing warning sign. The vast majority of our world, the deepest, darkest trenches of it, is a complete and total mystery. And, well, where there's mystery, there's plenty of room for something ancient to be waiting. And that brings us right to the speculative core of this explainer. What if the ocean actually has plans for us? I really want you to let that question sit with you for a second. This is the escalating dread that forms the whole what-if narrative arc of our story. We are dealing with an environment that covers most of our planet, and yet we are entirely blind to what happens down in its darkest depths. So, what if our ignorance isn't just a lack of technology? What if it's an oversight of a conscious, calculating entity? Section 1, The Unexplored Deep. So, our story follows Akira. She's a girl who has lived her entire life hearing this constant, unexplainable low whisper coming from the ocean, a sound absolutely no one else can hear. It's the solitary burden connecting her to the deep. And what's wild is how the story brilliantly grounds this uncanny connection in real science. Think about the pitch-black darkness below 1,000 meters. Down there, bioluminescent creatures literally create their own light in a world that has never, ever seen the sun. We humans look at that and assume, well, it's practical, right? Maybe it's for mating or, hunting. But the story drops this truly terrifying suggestion on us. What if that light isn't for them at all? What if they light up because they're being watched? What if something absolutely massive is lurking down there in the dark, and these creatures are just reacting to its gaze? Which leads us to Section 2, The Girl from Below. The mystery deepens tenfold when everything changes for Akira. A mysterious new student named Mio arrives and instantly validates Akira's lifelong secret. It becomes super clear, really fast, that Mio's arrival is no coincidence. I mean, she possesses knowledge that is just completely impossible for a normal human. She knows about ocean currents that aren't on any human map. She casually hears sounds our most sophisticated scientific instruments can't even pick up. And she gives these incredibly serious warnings about forbidden places to dive. She basically defies everything our best science says is possible. And then, boom, the bomb drops. The story delivers its first massive reveal. Mio just comes right out and confesses her true origins to Akira. She is from the deep. Let that line just hang in the air for a moment. It's the ultimate confirmation of every single suspicion Akira has ever had, and it acts as the real turning point of the whole story. The speculative what if isn't just a question anymore. The deep has physically arrived right there on the surface. Now, what's really interesting about this is that you'd expect sheer, unadulterated terror from Akira, right? I mean, a creature from the crushing depths has just revealed herself. But instead of being terrified, Akira feels the exact opposite. She feels this overwhelming, unexpected sense of total belonging. The narrative pivots brilliantly right here. It's not just a mystery anymore. It's suddenly a story about this deep, impossible, and incredibly intimate connection between a human and the abyss. Section 3, The Purpose of Love. So, how can this kind of otherworldly connection even exist in the first place? Why would a being from a lightless, crushing world below be drawn to a human on the surface? Well, the story proposes this fantastic, yet kind of tragic theory. It suggests these deep-sea beings come to the surface purely because they're emotionally incomplete. Down in their vast, ancient, underwater world, they lack a fundamental emotional capacity. They actually need to find a human connection to experience something they just cannot generate on their own: love. They come to our world specifically to harvest the emotional resonance of humanity. Moving on to Section 4, The Ocean Stares Back. Here is where the scale of the story shifts dramatically, from a personal romance into vast cosmic horror. Akira begins to physically feel the gaze of the ocean itself. Like the water is personified into a colossal, ancient intelligence, moving in the depths, staring right at her. And once again, the author yanks us right back to reality by anchoring this Lovecraftian dread to real scientific anomalies. Have you guys ever heard of the bloop? Real scientists actually recorded these massive, unexplained, low-frequency sounds from the deep ocean. Sounds that are so incredibly loud, they have absolutely no known biological or geological source. When you combine the cosmic dread of this story with real-world mysteries like the bloop, it genuinely makes you wonder exactly what is lurking down there in the dark. And this is where the story just starts firing off a barrage of staggering, speculative implications about what it means if the ocean is actually a single colossal mind.
Think about it. If the ocean isn't just an ecosystem made up of individual fish and plants, but a single, thinking organism, the implications are wild. It means every probe we send down, every surface ship we launch, isn't us exploring. It's merely an invitation we're actively handing to it. It suggests we aren't the masters of our planet at all. Honestly, it implies humanity is basically just living in a giant petri dish, being observed by the very water that surrounds us.
All of this builds to the most chilling philosophical question of all, one that completely reframes Akira and Mio's connection into something profoundly sinister. What if love isn't just a feeling? What if love is a lure? It's a terrifying thought. Maybe love is just a calculated, sinister method this vast, incomprehensible consciousness uses to reel in and claim human beings for itself. It essentially turns the most beautiful human emotion into a predatory mechanism.
Section 5, the final choice.
Now that Akira feels the gaze of the ocean fixed upon her, everything comes down to a single, irreversible decision that's going to permanently define her fate. Mio makes the offer very simple. Leave your world behind for good. Akira knows for sure that if she takes this step, she will never come back to the surface. But her love for Mio, whether it's genuine or just a cosmic lure, is simply stronger. In this bittersweet yet truly terrifying climax, Akira accepts the total unknown, choosing love, and they prepare to descend into the deep forever.
But wait, just when you think it's this romantic, if tragic ending, the story hits you with one final ominous twist. As they're about to descend, for the very first time, we see a flicker of alarm in Mio's eyes. Mio knows a horrifying secret that Akira doesn't. To survive down there, Akira must change. And Mio knows that this physical transformation into a creature of the deep, well, it isn't always a gentle one.
And that is exactly where this masterful story leaves us, on a haunting, unresolved cliffhanger. Akira has made her irreversible choice. She's going into the dark. But as she descends, we are left to wonder, will this vast, ancient consciousness waiting in the depths embrace her as one of its own? Or, having used love as a lure to draw her in, will it simply consume her? It's a philosophical and terrifying question designed to stick with you long after our explainer ends, leaving you to look at the dark, unexplored ocean in an entirely new, chilling light. Thanks for exploring this with me today.